The dust swirled through the streets of Holts Summit. It carried on the wind whispers of a name, Martha Withersby, a name uttered with a mixture of fear and disdain. She was a shadow, lurking at the edges of this quiet Missouri town. Her life had been steeped in sadness from the beginning. Martha's parents were cold, distant figures. Their eyes held no warmth for the young girl. They saw her as a burden, a chore, not a daughter. Days turned into weeks, then months, then years. The neglect burrowed deep into Martha's heart, leaving a void that ached with every beat. There was little solace to be found. The other children in Holts Summit sensed the darkness that clung to her. They avoided her. Their laughter, echoing from the town square, was a constant reminder of her isolation. Martha was alone, a solitary figure in a world that seemed determined to ignore her existence. She found solace in the woods surrounding the town. Among the trees and the whispering leaves, she felt a sense of belonging. Nature did not judge her. It did not turn its back on her. It simply accepted her. The news spread through Holts Summit like wildfire. Martha's parents were dead. A carriage accident, they said. It was a tragedy, of course. But beneath the surface of grief, a different emotion stirred within Martha: freedom. The shack on the hill, once her prison, now belonged solely to her. The silence that descended in the wake of her parents' deaths was deafening. Yet it was a welcome change from the constant tension that had permeated the air. Martha began to explore her newfound independence. She spent hours wandering the woods, her connection to nature deepening. She learned the names of the plants and their properties. She could identify the birds by their songs. But the shadows of her past lingered. The townspeople who had always kept their distance now viewed her with suspicion. Whispers followed her like a curse, whispers of the strange herbs she collected, whispers of the solitary ritual she performed under the pale moonlight. The whispers escalated. They transformed from hushed tones to outright accusations. Martha Withersby was different. She was strange. She was unnatural. The townspeople, bound by fear and superstition, began to call her a witch. Their words were like stones, each one chipping away at Martha's already fragile spirit. She retreated further into herself. The isolation she had always known deepened. It festered. It twisted. The woods, once her sanctuary, now echoed with the townspeople's fear. She was alone, truly alone, and in her solitude a terrible anger began to blossom, an anger fueled by years of neglect, rejection, and now outright hatred. The well in the town square was the lifeblood of Holts Summit. Its cool, clear water sustained them. It was a symbol of their community, of their shared existence. One by one, the townspeople began to fall ill. A strange sickness swept through Holts Summit, leaving a trail of misery in its wake. Children once full of life lay pale and sweating in their beds. Their parents, helpless and terrified, could only watch as the fever consumed them. The town doctor, baffled by the unknown ailment, could offer no cure. Panic gripped Holts Summit. What was this plague that had befallen them? Where had it come from? Suspicion, like a venomous snake, slithered through the streets, and its gaze fell upon Martha Withersby. She became their scapegoat, the embodiment of their fear. They pointed their accusing fingers at the strange woman on the hill, the woman who spoke to the wind and kept company with ravens, the woman they called a witch. Section 5: Darkness falls on Holts Summit. The sickness spread with terrifying speed. The once vibrant lifeblood of Holts Summit was poisoned, twisted into a source of suffering. The townspeople, desperate for an explanation, for someone to blame, converged on the shack on the hill. Their torches, flickering like malevolent eyes, illuminated the darkness. Fear and rage fueled their advance. They would have their revenge. Martha watched from her window as the mob approached. Their shouts, laced with hatred, echoed in the night. She felt no fear, only a cold certainty. Her heart, long ago hardened by their cruelty, felt nothing but a chilling emptiness. They had condemned her for being different, for seeking solace in the embrace of nature. Now they would face the consequences of their own ignorance. Section 6. The Reckoning. The door to her shack splintered under the force of their rage. They swarmed inside, their torches casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Martha stood before them, her head held high. Her eyes, once filled with a child's vulnerability, now burned with an icy fire. They accused her of witchcraft, of poisoning their well, of unleashing this plague upon their town. Their accusations were a cacophony of fear and ignorance. Their words meant nothing to her. She had expected no less from them. They had always been quick to judge, to condemn. "Yes," she said, her voice echoing through the ruined shack, "I poisoned your well." A hush fell over the mob, their anger momentarily forgotten in the face of her confession. Section 7. The Trial. The trial was a sham, a spectacle designed to appease the mob's thirst for vengeance. Martha, bound in chains, stood before the town council. Her fate sealed from the moment they laid eyes upon her. The evidence against her was non-existent, merely whispers and superstition. But in the eyes of the terrified townspeople, she was already guilty. They recounted tales of her strangeness, her affinity for the woods, her solitary nature. Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of her innocence. Martha listened to their accusations with a detached sense of amusement. They feared what they did not understand, and in their fear they sought to destroy. Her silence was her only defense. What words could she possibly offer to sway the minds poisoned by fear and ignorance? The verdict, as expected, was guilty. Martha Withersby, the woman they called a witch, was sentenced to death. Section 8. The Pyre of Innocence. The pyre blazed high in the town square. The flames, fueled by their hatred, danced and swayed in the twilight air. Martha, her white dress billowing in the wind, was led towards her fate. Her steps were slow and deliberate. There was no fear in her eyes, only a deep sadness. The townspeople, their faces illuminated by the firelight, watched in morbid fascination. Justice, they believed, was being served. As the flames licked at her feet, Martha closed her eyes and embraced the heat. She had found a strange peace in this moment, a release from the pain and isolation that had haunted her entire life. The fire consumed her, reducing her body to ash. But in the hearts of the townspeople, a seed of doubt began to grow. Had they condemned an innocent woman? Had their fear blinded them to the truth? Section 9. Echoes of the Past. The sickness that had gripped Holts summit vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The well, once poisoned, ran clear once more, but the memory of Martha Withersby lingered like a ghost. Her name, once whispered in fear, was now spoken with a mixture of guilt and regret. The townspeople, haunted by her tragic fate, began to question their actions. Had they been too quick to judge? Too eager to believe the whispers of superstition? The shack on the hill, now nothing more than a pile of charred rubble, served as a constant reminder of their collective sin. Martha's story became a cautionary tale, passed down through generations, a tale about the dangers of fear, the destructive power of ignorance, and the haunting consequences of revenge.